What is up, everyone, and welcome to Drop In, where we have open, authentic conversations about all things mental health, including masculinity in mental health. Oh, the Dr. J's are here. Dr. Jackie, how are you?
Fantastic. Running on 2 hours of sleep. Love that for me.
2 hours of sleep. My biology could never.
Yeah. You just get used to it when you have a brain like mine.
No, my brain literally could never. I would just call it a day before it began. Masculinity. How about a little bufo toad night like we had last night? How does that rank in the most traditional masculine things you've ever done?
Well, first and foremost, I think that is like a test that every couple should have to go through to test their communication styles, how they work together as a team.
We fought a lot. There was a lot of fighting going on.
We were not our best selves.
To set the stage, we live in South Florida. Many things are invasive down here, and we love that. We have herds of iguanas roaming our yard. There's parrots. But the bufo toad, otherwise known as the cane toad, large toad that dwells from the Amazon. It's
not cute.
It's massive. It's huge.
It is large.
The problem with these bufo toads or cane toads is they have large poisonous sacs on the back of their neck. And this is not great if you own dogs.
Yes.
Dog owners know bufo toad equates to bad.
Yes.
So I'm driving back into the neighborhood and it's peak cane toad mating season. I was to get into our neighborhood, I was weaving through all the cane toads.
Ugh.
And when I walked through the door, I just had that energy. When you hear a little bit of my Ohio country come out, that's when you know. I'm like, baby, meet me in the yard.
We're doing this.
We got cane toads to catch.
Yeah.
Sure enough, they were out and about.
That was a full hunting adventure.
Catching them, putting them in buckets, and then escorting them to the nearest little creek by our community and say, "Get out of our fenced yard!
Get off my lawn!
Get out of here!" It was a very masculine thing to go out in the rain catching these toads.
Yeah. I don't know that has been at the top of my list in terms of things that I typically would do on any given weekday night. Probably one of the more masculine things that I've done for sure.
Which is a nice segue of this whole episode. We're going to be talking about masculinity, and we're going to be talking a lot about men. However, masculinity is a phenomenon, set of behaviors, construct that many people can experience. Again, women, non-binary, trans, men sort of bathe in it 24/7, but many people can dip into masculinity and experience it intentionally, unintentionally, the pressures. But we're going to be talking about the impact of mental health. And I was looking up a little bit about the types of masculinity.
This was fascinating to me.
This is something they didn't cover in our psychology, coursework to get our doctorate degrees. Hegemonic. I looked up how to say that word. You heard me in bed. 16 different ways people pronounce it, but it's traditional masculinity.
Yes.
Is the way to think of it. It's the dominant form in many cultures, prioritize strength, controlled dominance over others, emotional restraint, and heterosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
Toxic masculinity is the one that's all the rage. Everyone talks about. It's really about confining men. This is the way you have to be. You have to suppress emotions, often using violence or power. And the key is rejecting anything that may be perceived as feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Positive or healthy masculinity is emphasizing traits like responsibility, empathy, integrity, vulnerability, and emotional intelligence, while still allowing room for some traditionally masculine strengths like strength, assertiveness, balance, and respect. The final one, fluid masculinity, otherwise known as inclusive masculinity, recognizes masculinity as a diverse and is diverse and flexible, shaped by personal identity, culture, class, race, and sexuality, rejects the idea that there is only one way for a man to be. Have you heard of these before?
I've heard of toxic masculinity for sure, because that is something that is much more talked about. But I've never heard of the other categories. I guess the way that I've always thought of masculinity is within this continuum of masculinity towards femininity and everything in between. And I've heard of like alpha versus beta, and those
Oh,
are, yeah, a lot of conversations that I've had even with clients about alpha versus beta and what that means and what alpha kind of qualities come to mind. And I associate a lot of that with toxic masculinity, which is something that, is much more talked about these days. But I've never heard of the other three categories. So it's interesting to hear them categorized that way. What would you say that you fall into in terms of those categories?
I firmly believe there's not one way to be masculine. So I guess that would be more fluid or inclusive.
Mhm.
However, I feel like a lot of my efforts in working with men is in the realm of healthy
Mhm.
masculinity. Because I don't feel that there's anything wrong with these sort of traditional, many of them of like strength, you know, the hyper focus. We get into what Mamba mentality is,
Mhm.
RIP Kobe. But a lot of these things that men who are arguing from the toxic side will say, well, I'm not allowed to be strong, or I can't be a man. And for
Mhm.
me, it's like, I never feel that way unless, again, you're harming, suppressing others, holding
Sure.
people back. But I definitely, it's interesting because I agree with the philosophy of there's no one way for any man to be.
Right.
And yet I think all of us live our lives more flexibly and are more adaptable when you're not in a box.
Mhm. Well, I think that's the challenge a lot of times with the theory of masculinity, and where I think a lot of the toxic masculinity culture kind of comes from, is that thought that you have to specifically be in this box
Right.
that is categorized by masculinity and by X, Y, and Z types of traits, right? And if anything threatens that, then there's a problem, or there is something wrong with you, or that you are less of a man or less masculine or something to that effect.
Right. And this is why it's so important to talk about when we say masculinity in mental health, because we know, men are far less likely to, or significantly men are significantly less likely to seek therapy than women. And we know, more men die of suicide each year, significantly so than women. And a lot of these ways in traditional masculinity move away from the things we know to be helpful through a psychotherapy or psychological lens. What's your experience been like? You have a lot of men that seek you out and
Mhm.
want to work with you,
Mhm.
which is always interesting of who you select. Maybe we do a whole podcast episode on that of who you select as
Yeah.
your therapist and why. I've only ever had women as therapists. I could go into a lot of reasons for that. But what's your experience been working with so many different men or on this topic of masculinity?
Yeah. I feel like I have such broad experiences with working with men, because I've worked with a lot of different populations, right? I've worked with first responders and law enforcement. I've worked with a lot of people in government positions. And it's interesting because there are certain populations and cultures that very much breed more of this toxic masculinity culture. And that's not, all law enforcement or all first response or government or anything like that necessarily, but there tends to be certain camps that people fall into. And the interesting thing, and this is something that always stood out to me, was I know that I pull something different from men and working with men versus maybe a man therapist or evaluator or something like that. And the thing that always stood out to me, and this was so interesting, was when I was working doing evaluations for law enforcement. Um, there were a lot of men that I had talked to, and during the evaluation, we weren't doing therapy at all. There was no therapeutic element to this whatsoever. It was purely evaluations. And going through history and questions and testing, and there were a good amount of men who ended up leaving my office in tears, and not in a bad way, in this really amazing, like, connecting way of they had never talked about mental health before or been asked a lot of personal questions or shared experiences that they had in their work life, in their personal life. And for them, it elicited a lot of emotion. And to me, it was something that was really cool that I got to experience. But no one else in the office that I worked in elicited that response from many of the people that were coming in. And this is mostly male dominated in terms of the people that we were seeing, but not all. But there was this culture of masculinity. But it was really interesting because I think there was something that stood out to me that I was able to elicit these responses from people, and that they felt comfortable enough responding to my inquiries and talking about things that they had never really talked about before. And it was really, to me, a beautiful experience that they got to then open up and share more about themselves.
Just really interesting because you tapped on a lot of important points in there. And like one of them is just this sheer question of how many times, if you're in this masculinity world or box, how many times are you really asked, how are you really doing?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm really trying to reflect on that. Like before I got, in the therapy grad school sphere, how many times? Like nothing's coming to mind.
Yeah.
It's like you would have to be in the midst of like losing it, like in anger or something, for like your friends to be like, what's wrong with you?
Mm-hmm.
Or like, what's up?
Mm-hmm.
Again, in the very limited scope that you're allowed to express, which I talk about all the time of like, after my dad died, he died of brain cancer over winter break my sophomore year of undergrad. And I went right back spring semester, living on campus, doing all the things. And, a few people asked like, oh man, I'm sorry, or, kind of put that out there. But the only thing I felt was anger.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the only thing I was allowed to feel.
Right.
No way in hell, in the way I was raised, the culture I came from, would it be okay to like be crying about that or feel okay to?
Yeah. Which is honestly really sad because
Incredibly sad.
the
Yeah.
fact that the only quote unquote safe emotion to feel when you go through such a significant loss is anger, and not sadness, not grief, not any of the other feelings, right? Even happiness sometimes
Right.
gets negatively categorized. But the fact that anger is the only safe emotion to express, there's something really sad about that.
It's incredibly sad and limiting. And I think of like in that time, I'm an undergrad, so there's already a culture of heavy substance use, but my drinking skyrocketed.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the most I drank in any chapter of my life. But again, you think of the very narrow streams
Mm-hmm.
in a masculine sense that you're able to go down. And it's like you can be angry, you can be pissed off, you can take it out in sports, and you can consume a lot of substance.
Right. Which is the norm in terms of this quote unquote masculine culture. Is the coping is very avoidant, right? Whether that's alcohol, numbing, working out, which is a good thing, but when that's your only method of coping and you're not talking about emotions or not able to connect with emotions and you're just trying to push it down, that is a really challenging way to cope with all of the emotions of the world and of your experience, because it tends to hit a certain tipping point or a wall. Because yes, that might work in the short term, but then it gets to a point where then what?
Right.
That runs out. And then what do you do with all of that emotion that has been pent up that you weren't able to express?
And that's a lot of what I see of men coming into treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're having panic attacks every day.
Mm-hmm.
They're so deep into the throes of, substance abuse and use that they're, lost their job or about to lose their job. Their relationship is ending. It's just like such dire straits before you're able to say like, oh, I've experienced a lot of things in my life that are hard, sad, depressing, that I don't feel strong. Like I don't feel strong in navigating this or feeling like I got this master plan, which it feels like a lot of times is put in masculinity of like, you always have to know.
Mm-hmm.
Fuck the pressure that comes with that of always having to know. Where I feel like in a more feminine sense, it's okay not to know. It's okay to explore. It's okay to collaborate. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to express emotion of confusion. And again, in very toxic masculinity, it's not. Figure it out, bro.
Yeah. And that's the challenge, is a lot of times with masculinity, there is no outlet for those emotions. And with toxic masculinity, especially, that's so isolating. It's so limiting, like you said, because if the only way that you are able to express emotions is through externalizing, through anger, through violence, through domineering, through those types of mechanisms, or through things that feel very dominant, versus actually being able to look internally and express some of those very real emotions that are super valid. There's two very different aspects to that, and there's no way that people are able to fully express and get in touch with the way that they're actually feeling in that context.
Absolutely. And it makes me think of like the influence of models.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of clients I've had that, come in before things are at 100. And almost always they've had men in their lives that model something different.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder for you, like, what was the examples of masculinity? What were you taught about masculinity growing up on Long Island, up in New York?
York. Yeah, I mean, masculinity, especially in the family that I grew up in the culture that I grew up in, it was very dominant, very assertive, even aggressive. Um, Take no shit, strong. You don't talk about your emotions. You maybe have a slight soft side that comes out every once in a while, but most people don't get to see that. There's very little vulnerability. And because of that, I don't think there's enough connection. And that's the thing that I would say, even in terms of my own thoughts and biases, is I grew up in a culture that was primarily toxic masculinity. So that was something that I know very well. And that was something that was modeled for me in a lot of ways. And do I think that was a healthy way of expressing masculinity? Probably not, no. Because then there is that, yeah, independence to a fault. And I think there are some characteristics that I recognize even in myself that I've had to overcome that are very quote unquote toxic masculine types of characteristics, even in terms of that like avoidance or independence and take no shit kind of mentality.
Yeah, in our relationship early on, we really grew in that realm.
Mhm.
Like I felt like I was at a stage where I didn't give a single solitary fuck. I'm like, I'm just gonna like lay it all out there. Like, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm looking for. This is what I'm dealing with. But I sense that from you early on in our relationship that it was really hard for you to be authentic and vulnerable in that sense.
Yeah.
Like you're a runner
Yeah.
in every as we always joke in every sense but literal running.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting because it's funny, I actually do possess a lot of like quote unquote masculine types of characteristics and energies. I think I'm always authentic, but the vulnerability side
I'm
is
not. I cut you off.
a
No, you're not.
struggle.
I cut you off. So masculine of me to cut you off. You're not.
No,
You're not.
how so?
Anything that you would deem to be a uh I'm choosing my words wisely here. And but I'm gonna say it, a
As you should.
more softer emotion
Yeah.
you will avoid and run from. It's
Not totally wrong. And that's something that, okay. The thing that I will say is, again, given the culture that I grew up in,
I agree.
my automatic response is yes, to run from emotions that feel vulnerable and situations or connections that feel vulnerable. Is that something that I have tried to address and very much have, I think, in a safe space, been able to reflect on and recognize if and when that does come up and start to like challenge those moments and make those changes. I'm a work in progress, as are all of us. But yes, that is my automatic thought and feeling.
hide this emotion.
Yes.
Deal with it on my own.
Yes. AKA, I am a toxic masculine automatic thinker.
Well, I think you have a lot of traits of. I really do.
Yeah.
And I think
Which
there's
is
more.
interesting within our dynamic too.
And I think it's like my life experiences being, soaked into the psychotherapy culture, which is diverse, but largely feminine
Mhm.
women, and being invited into that space of we really appreciate you being authentic.
Mhm.
We really appreciate you naming that emotion.
Yeah.
Foreign language for many men, but when you're soaking in that river for so many years, and I know a lot of people who go on and get advanced degrees in this field would relate. It changes you.
Yeah.
It changes you a lot because I came from the master's degree in experimental. That did not feel it very much the experimental realm. High competition,
Mhm.
high. My paper needs to be published before yours does.
Yes.
Very competitive. Again, it can be collaborative at times. It is night and day compared to the people in the mental health space who go into practitioner therapist versus experimental researcher.
Yeah. Not
Different,
touchy feely.
not touchy feely. Again, sure, there's always exceptions, but those cultures are very different. But I agree, like it changed me because growing up, you know, my dad was just always working.
Mhm.
If he wasn't working, he was hiking. If he wasn't hiking, he was playing a sport or lifting weights.
Mhm.
L- the times we bonded the most would be like side by side playing Mario Kart or like shooting baskets in the backyard.
Well, and that's the thing that's interesting too, is even in terms of thinking about the upbringing that you had and the culture and the context of all of that. Can you remember moments of connection or having those vulnerable conversations?
Only a couple times. Only like truly a couple times, which is wild to reflect on, especially when someone is battling something like cancer. And, my dad's methods of dealing with that was avoidance, pure.
Mhm.
Often, like, in us not knowing, like, when he was going to have his next appointment or what the feedback from that was. Like, I mean, he really, like, kept things to himself. And it's hard thinking back on that, but it makes sense because that's all he knew. He grew up in a one stoplight town in middle of nowhere. Some of you think you know what middle of nowhere is. You don't have a damn clue. We fight about this all the time. You're like, oh, you get out in the sticks in Long Island. And I'm like, you don't know what sticks are. But he grew up in a one stoplight town. I believe his graduating class was 20 people. It's
Wild.
surrounded by miles and miles of farmland, a lot of Amish people out there, but truly just like small country Ohio town.
Mhm.
He never, the exposure to the things that we're talking about
Right.
internet, social media,
Yeah.
it's just different. And so you think about that a lot. It's, and parents, always get the brunt of any rap on things. But if the exposure to the newness, the vulnerability, the information, if you don't have that, how are you going to be different?
Mhm.
And if the people around you, like in the workforce he was in, um, again, very physical in a lot of ways, how are you going to experience something different?
Right. Or
To
even know that that's an option.
and even that is sort of hard to imagine in some ways nowadays, but your algorithm is tailored. Like, we know this, it's
True.
catered.
Mhm.
Like, and again, we have access, whether or not you're typing in YouTube, like a conversation like this, like masculinity and mental health, is questionable, but at least the information nowadays is out there. If someone can be curious enough to step outside the culture they know.
Sure. And I think that's a challenge a lot of times is the culture that you have been most exposed to. And therefore, there's this confirmation bias that it feels most comfortable to stay living in that space. And I think of a lot of the people who I've worked with, and even just thinking about when they come to therapy and getting to a certain breaking point a lot of times in order to really take a look at things and reassess what might be different or what they could do differently. Um, but a lot of times it seems like a last ditch effort of I've gone to every doctor, all my medical
Right.
doctors, and I've, you know, gone to the gym a million times and I have done X, Y, and Z to try to navigate this and tackle this. And it feels like a lot of times it is a last ditch effort for people who grew up in that culture. And I think now it is a little bit different. I think the younger generations have been exposed to more emotional intelligence, and even in terms of education, some curriculums are introducing, well, maybe not anymore. Who the hell knows? Because we're going, 100 years backwards at
Suppressing
this
all
point.
education and information.
But I've heard of some curriculums that are introducing more emotional intelligence and understanding of coping tools and things along those lines. So I think there is a difference now in terms of exposure to different aspects and different cultures and different ways of looking at things, that maybe even we didn't have.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I don't remember any of these conversations when I was coming up, even through my undergrad. I'm studying psychology, never
Mhm.
once. I never, now, human sexuality course was like the most progressive thing. It was my last course I took at Kent State University to get my bachelor's degree in 2007. Dead last course. I'm like, dang, where has all this information been my entire life? This seems pretty important
So
to talk
funny.
about and think about, but a lot of these things of like gender norms, gender roles, sexuality, all
Mhm.
the things. Um, it makes me think about this because a lot of people, hearing this conversation will often be like, well, people in the mental health space, they just hate masculinity.
Mm.
You're a psychologist out here working with people one on one. How do you know when the ways people are using navigating masculinity is toxic versus healthy?
Well, I think part of that is evaluating what's working for them and what's not, and how guarded they are in terms of that work. And I've had people from, one end of the spectrum all the way to the other, right? I've worked with, the person who is working in corporate, drives the Lamborghini, is a big buff type dude that has a really hard time getting in touch with emotions and is experiencing the real burnout effects of insecurity that has been pushed down for years and years and not feeling safe enough to talk about emotions. And so I've worked with people from that end of the spectrum all the way to much more fluid ideas of masculinity. And I think the key takeaway that I always recognize when that becomes either unhealthy or more quote unquote toxic is when there is this huge guardedness when it comes to talking about emotions or talking about looking inward and really expressing insecurity or vulnerability or connecting with emotions in a way that isn't just anger or, punching holes in walls.
Totally. And I think also it comes out in their relationships. I said a tale as old as time. Bro, nobody knows you.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody. That person you've been in this situationship, back and forth for 6 months, and you feel like they're not really putting energy into it's actually hurting you. You won't admit it. They don't know you at all.
Right.
You don't let them.
And even friendships, a lot of
They
times,
don't
very
know you.
surface feeling.
They know what you do,
Mm-hmm.
because you work out together, you watch the sport together, you do this together. And it's not to minimize that. But again, it's this feeling of I'm in the room with them, but I feel alone.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the biggest takeaway that I've seen. Again, even when I was working and doing evaluations, was you've never had anyone ask you these questions. You've never had anyone ask you about your experiences or your personal life or the things that you've been through. That's never been a conversation that you've ever had or voiced out loud. And that's something to me that, again, is so sad that our culture has perpetuated this, that you feel like you are an island by yourself in a room full of people.
It happens all the time. Happens all the time because the sort of schemas that get implanted, within masculinity is no one cares, suck it up, figure it out, don't cry about it, pull yourself up, you're not working hard enough.
Yeah.
You think about how opposite that is of so many things in psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
You're not giving yourself a moment to breathe. You're not giving yourself a moment of release. You're not allowing any emotion to come out or even vulnerable thought,
Mm-hmm.
which for a lot of men, that's the place to start. They might not have hold of the emotion, but they have some thoughts, living in the cognitive that they've never spoken out loud.
And that's where, honestly, even when men that, again, were raised in a toxic culture come to therapy, I give them a lot of credit because these conversations that we're having in therapy are really new and uncomfortable because
Right.
they're unfamiliar. And I give men a lot of credit when they do reach out for help because that is something that is frowned upon in so many ways. And men a lot of times are made to feel like they don't need to ask for help, or they should know what the answer is, or should be able to figure it out themselves. So I'm always really grateful when I have men that reach out to me that want to work with me and want to, do therapy and go through that process, because it's scary for anyone, but especially when the norm or the culture that you were raised in or grew up in or continue to be surrounded by is telling you that, you need to just suck it up. That's really scary to go completely against what you've been told and what you have been reinforced to believe.
And you got to often go back to that culture, which is something, in our privileged positions as therapists, and this is true with literally any cultural variable, but I think is often left out of the conversation is like, so what? You had this vulnerable experience, which is important, in therapy, 55 minutes, maybe you run to the hour. I don't know how you do that all day long, doing your full hour sessions back to back. I'm not the best timekeeper, so whatever. But then it's like, and then what? And that to me is the hard part. It's not just what they express in the protected space of therapy and what they release and let out. What's next? Because if all the culture they know and surround themselves is like, I don't want to hear that shit.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Right. And I think that's where a lot of the work in therapy is also helpful in terms of translating that into real life environment. And
Totally.
sometimes that's feasible and sometimes it's not super feasible, depending on where someone's located, what the culture is around there, what the work environment that they're in, or the family dynamic that they're in, or the cultural background, or all of these different elements. But a lot of the work that I end up doing with male clients or masculine clients is being able to have these little sprinkles of the therapy work and healing outside of the therapy dynamic and outside of that hour a week.
Ask your friend how they're really doing. These are the dynamic changes that are always like, yeah, it's so exciting to hear people report back of like, no, I really asked him. I said, how's it going? And they're like, it's fine. And I'm like, no, how's it really going? How's your marriage going?
Yeah.
Those types of questions. You don't get asked these questions, which I see all the comedy posts and stuff on social media where they're like,
of the one where like there was that trend of the guys that called their boys up and were like, hey man, just wanted to call you and say goodnight. Love you.
There's something sweet about that. I'm like, just calling over bro and be like, hey, I'm just saying, I want to say goodnight to you real quick. But even that, I think it's sweet and endearing. It's still not very deep. It might be like getting through the door. But the videos I was thinking of are the ones where they're always skip based. But it's like, oh, like the dude stereotypically comes home from golf or the gym or some shit and is like, oh, Joe and Lisa are getting divorced. And they're like, oh my God, how's Joe doing? And he's like, I have no idea. What do you mean? What happened? And he's like, well, I have no idea. They're getting a divorce. I didn't ask. And so, but it's the video, the theme is that over and over again of like asking zero follow-up questions, getting no details, getting no clue of the emotion, literally just the facts.
Yeah.
They're getting a divorce. That's all that was said. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't want to push. This is what men will always say. I didn't want to push. I want to pry. Yeah. You mean you didn't? They broached a sensitive subject. You didn't want to lean in. You're like,
full sprint.
Good luck with that.
See you never.
Good luck with your whole world splitting wide open.
Well, and that actually makes me think about, again, the conversations that we've had, even in terms of men or masculine individuals seeking out a female therapist a lot of times.
That's why I've always done it. It's safer. And
I think that's important to be able to name and to like
yeah.
talk about that pull.
But I almost feel like in my own psychotherapy journey, it's like due time.
Mhm.
Like when I like self-reflect, and there's something about that that makes it feel nervous of like,
Yeah.
it's probably due time I got a male therapist after 5, women therapists, but it's always felt safer. Always.
Why?
Because the models in my life, all throughout my life, who have been the safest spaces has always been either women, non-binary, or trans,
Mhm.
not traditional men.
Yeah. Because I agree. I don't think that that's normed for us.
No, it's not. I mean, this is like the heart of it. And I give a lot of credit to men that seek me out that are truly looking for that corrective emotional experience. And I am a foreign entity to them. And I've had those experiences, and internally I'm like, yo, you've been a far braver than me in a lot of ways. And again, it's not putting a value judgment totally on that, because you need what you need and you need to move forward. And like so many times in my life, I'm like, I just need the safest space possible. Like, and this
Right.
is it for me. So again, I'm not judging in that sense, but it is impressive when I'm like, you're getting an active exposure treatment by selecting me when you've never had a male figure in your entire life sort of speaking this language to you, where
Mhm.
many men have had women do that. They might lean out, they might run, they might avoid, but they've had a feminine figure in their life that models like, no, you can really tell me.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's again another one of those potential experiences that maybe we need that graded exposure, right? Of like, if the only way that you are going to reach out to someone and talk about mental health or talk about the way that you're feeling or feel comfortable enough or safe enough to let down some of those walls is to seek someone that feels comfortable or safe for you, by all means, I 100% support that. And I think there's also this next level where that challenge can come into play, where, you've seen 5 female therapists, and then the next time that you go back to therapy, you decide, all right, I'm going to challenge myself in this new way and have these experiences and do something new that feels, quite frankly, unsafe, uncertain, unfamiliar, foreign. And being able to just find that corrective experience and have more of those moments of connection.
It's even interesting with all the amazing people I've interacted with in our field and how I can default when I'm around the men in our field of like, I've had corrective experiences within that, but I've also had a lot of like default surface level, and that like far and away, like all the, amazing people who are not men that I've interacted with in this field, it's like almost never like that. It's like you
Isn't
sort
that
of, you
interesting?
just float through like the modeling of like, yo, just be real. Like, you're having a tough time. This is overwhelming for you. You're sad today. Like, cool. Like, you can tell me about it. And then I think of like again, and I'm actively reflecting now of how you can just like snap into these
Mhm.
sort of patterns that are like ingrained in what you know.
Yeah. I know it is interesting to think about because, again, I think it's so automatic.
It's familiar. It's safe in a lot of ways. Yeah, it's just really interesting. And I've never asked you this. Have your therapists been men or women?
That's a good question. I've had both. Interestingly, the person that I stuck with the longest was a male. I think part of that was me seeking out a very different experience
Mhm.
in that regard because of, what we've talked about in terms of growing up in a pretty toxic masculine culture, not just in my house, but like in the cultural environment that I was raised.
Right, right.
So, yeah, that was something that I actively sought out for myself. And it was corrective in a lot of ways because I was able to have those conversations. Um, and again, it's interesting because being female identified and holding a lot of toxic masculine traits or characteristics from my upbringing and a lot of those coming out as my natural tendencies, I think I present differently than probably a lot of other women, but I also had to challenge those same, I guess, pieces that held me back and continue to, in a lot of ways, because, yeah, we're a product of our reinforced environment and our culture. And I mean, listen, I have these conversations even with female clients, with my non binary clients, trans clients, all of that. And just talking about the spectrum of masculine and feminine characteristics and what they feel most connected to. Because I also find a lot of female clients who are very much like me in the fact that they
Yeah,
didn't have that environment that felt safe to have those conversations and be vulnerable. So it's not just the male clients out there or just the men out there that, would rather, you know, do anything than go to therapy. It would rather, yeah, play in traffic and learn crypto and do whatever it is than go to therapy. But
right. No, that's so true. It's interesting because it becomes category by category, but I feel like in our relationship, I'm far more likely to name the emotion than you are.
yes,
Far, far more. You and
not wrong.
you need a literal like lap around in a vehicle every now and then walking. You need a lap to sort of come to the emotion, which feels more masculine.
Mhm.
When in a moment, I think I'm quicker to just be like, I'm feeling like not heard in this moment, or I'm
Right,
feeling, you know, confused or whatever it may be.
right. No, I totally agree. And I think there is that element again of masculinity and the culture that you are brought up in and having to challenge those things, which is hard because it's not automatic for most of us.
Totally. Which, makes me reflect on what are the traditional masculine qualities that you appreciate.
Mhm.
And
That's
I
a
think
good
the hard
question.
thing about this conversation is a lot of times it's like it all depends how it's used.
Right.
If you're harming others, if you're manipulating others, if you're controlling others, that
Yeah.
makes a big difference. But
Yeah. I think when I think of traditional masculinity, I think of more of the toxic masculine qualities because I think of traditional roles or traditional gender roles. But when I think of masculinity as a whole and it as a healthy construct, one of the biggest things that I appreciate, even within your masculinity, is a sense of security within yourself, right? So you are able to have hard conversations. You are able to name things that you're feeling. You are able to be assertive, not aggressive, but assertive in the ways that you communicate things and are able to then model that from a place of confidence and from a place of I feel secure enough in myself that I don't feel threatened by this conversation or by this insecurity or by this behavior or this action. I feel confident enough in myself, in my masculinity, in who I am to be able to have the hard conversations.
That's so well said. Yeah. And again, it's always to what degree in these things, because strength in it of self is not bad.
Right.
Strength isn't bad unless you're using it to, harm, manipulate, bully others. And I think that's what when I think about, especially the things like, I'm definitely, my most masculine trait is probably how much of a sporty McSportser I am. I just love watching all sports, engaging in sport. I get an area me and my dad overlapped in so much. It doesn't matter the sport. I can talk about it, lean into it and want to. But the thing I love about that is the perseverance. And it's like, so I get all these videos all the time. They're like Mamba mentality, which is really like lean in every single day and stay steadfast on that vision, the goal you have for yourself. Take it to the extreme. You're isolated, you're alone, you don't have any relationship anymore. You forgot about your partner, you've stepped over your friends, but pulled back. This is important to me, and I'm going to tackle this and give it everything I got. And there's just something I love about that within, again, this traditional masculine culture is like, give it everything you got.
Yeah.
Trust the process. Put in the work every day.
I love that.
And you get this sense of, has this tipped over for someone in a way that this is wrecking the relationships and the foundation of your life? Or there's something that like has a glow to it about this that you're just like, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Like, I'm excited for you.
Well, and I think that's with any one of those traits, right? Is they're all in a continuum. And if we go too far in one direction, on either side, I'm sure there's a challenge or an element of unhealthy or maladaptive elements. But being able to find the core of a lot of those characteristics and using that to your advantage in a healthy way that is adaptive for your life, I think is something that we can all embrace, whether it's masculine or feminine or somewhere in between in terms of those traits.
Absolutely. Which is why, like, when I reflect on this question, I'd be, excited to hear what you would say about it. When I think of helping people move from sort of this toxic realm into a healthy, more balanced space, it's to be known. It's to be authentic. And that includes all the things you feel and think. Not just the ways that we've been told or put into a box. And like we've talked about in this episode of like having to suck it up or just use anger or strength. There's something behind that anger. There's hurt there.
Yeah.
There's pain there. But you just stuffing that down, that's inauthentic. It's really inauthentic. And I use that word, as a way to showcase like other people could bond to that authenticity and learn from it, grow from it. And you can too. And it creates connection, not just with yourself, but with others. Yeah. So it's finding those little moments where you can be more authentic.
And I think about a lot of my clients, my male clients who are parents. And a lot of what we talk about is what they're modeling for their kids and what they want to translate in terms of that connection and in terms of what feels safe to talk about and what feels safe to express and ways that they want their kids to feel because of the dynamic that they have with them. And a big part of that is being able to be authentic. And that's challenging, right? Because we have to name our own shit a lot of times and be able to then model that for our kids, the younger generation. And again, even for ourselves, it's challenging. But I think it's also really beautiful when we think about the context of I'm not just doing this for me. I'm doing this for my kids and to model healthy relationships and healthy masculinity for them.
It's so true. And I think that's an area of femininity that is just so connecting, where you can just express gratitude in meaning to another person of what you mean to me and how grateful and thankful I am for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of men, and again, in the masculinity sense, would do well starting in that space of giving gratitude, thanks, like leaning in and expressing what someone means to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just rarely done when you get too far into the toxic masculinity.
For sure.
Too focused on holding up the entire world.
Mm-hmm. Which gets heavy. Sometimes you got to put it down.
You do. And you got to trust that that's going to make you stronger, internally, but also stronger within interpersonal social relationships of all kind, which again, men can minimize. It can feel like the lonely road out there, which is why like all men's favorite movie is Interstellar. Have you heard this?
I mean, I haven't seen the movie, but I'm sure you're not shocked by that.
They do nothing. It's also,
I've seen 0 movies, apparently.
I can't tell you how offensive it's been. It is my favorite movie, probably top 3, but at times it's been like, yeah, this is the best movie I've ever seen. And it's like, there's a reason that captures so many men. There's so many themes of like isolation, blasting off into space, having to save the world. There's just like all these stereotypical themes. There's also some cooler themes. I won't spoil the movie, but
I'll add it to the list of movies that I have not watched but need to.
gosh. Well, we always appreciate you tuning in with us every week here on Drop In, trying to have the authentic, human, difficult at times, emotional conversations, but really, really important. Hey, send this to anybody, masculine, feminine, anywhere in between. Find the fluidity of it all. But rate, review, share. Always love reading your comments. And we'll see you next week right here on Drop In.
Bye.